Hello everybody, hope you're all having an amazing day. It's Wednesday, so we're doing our usual little lesson, break from Road to Master, whatever you want to call it. And I was struggling what to sort of do for today's video. And I was thinking back to my Road to Master games over the past few days. And there's been some notable moves, specifically blunders, I guess you could call them. And I was sort of in my own head about that. It's very tough to recover from blunders, and we all know what it's like to blunder. And it's very easy to, when you're analyzing your games, to go back and say this is just a blunder. Like this is something I should have seen. Anyone else could have seen this. I was just being stupid in that 1 second, and there is some truth to that. I'm not going to deny that there's some truth to that, and I'm just as hard on myself as I'm sure you guys are on yourselves whenever you blunder. It's a horrible feeling. And there are ways to fix that, but I think ultimately blunders are just a part of the game. They are just a part of the game, and however hard they are, you've just got to accept that and learn from them. So, for today's video, I thought we would all lighten our moods a bit. Especially me, who's been on a bit of a blunder streak recently. And we're just going to cover 5 of some absolutely brutal blunders from top level players, grandmasters, up to world champions, which is crazy to think that they even blunder, but they do, and it's spectacular when it happens, really. So we're just going to take a break from the actual learning, and just sit back and have some fun looking at some spectacular blunders from top players. So, without further ado, here goes into the first example. So, the first example we're looking at today, it's going to be a player called Ibralizzi versus Ragozin. So, Ibralizzi has the white pieces and Ragozin has the black. Now, you might have heard of Ragozin before, especially if you are a Queen's Gambit player. And I'll show you where it comes from. This is the Queen's Gambit declined Ragozin defense. With the bishop coming to b4, and this is named after the same player. It's the same player who this opening is named after. And if you know the world champion Mikhail Botvinnik, extremely amazing player, world champion. Ragozin was the second for Botvinnik in at least one world championship match. I don't know about any others. And if you don't know what a second is just somebody, it's almost like a training partner. It's somebody who helps prepare you for games, mostly does like opening work. And Ragozin was a legendary opening enthusiast, scholar, whatever you want to call it, who was an expert in lots of things like the Queen's Gambit. So this is named after him. And here we have Ragozin with the black pieces. Now, if we just take a minute to look at the position, we'll notice black has these 2 devastating pass pawns versus the 1 and 2 over here. So this is going to be quite slow on this side, and these are extremely fast and extremely dangerous. So what black wants to do here is trade everything off if possible and just win this king and pawn endgame. The only problem is black's rook is currently under attack, which makes things a bit tricky. So black decides to throw in this really cool move, bishop to e7, which is good. Just counter-attacking this rook on d8 while your rook's still hanging. And if they decide to take the rook, you just take their rook, and it's just turned into a trade. You've isolated this pawn as well. So this is a really cool move. And in response, his opponent plays rook to d7. Now this makes complete sense. You're just pinning the bishop to the rook, and also you're hitting this a pawn, which is quite interesting, actually. How does black get out of this while keeping the a pawn? Because you can't go rook a4. What are you going to do? And Ragozin came up with this really sort of interesting idea, we'll say. He noticed that this bishop is actually free to check the king at some point. So he played this move, rook to c7. Now, this is the blunder we're going to be covering. And I'll give you a hint, it does not work. And the whole idea is that the bishop checks the king and forks the rook. Which is the whole idea we can see here. The check. The problem is, after white takes this rook, the bishop's still pinned to the king. And it doesn't actually have the legal move to go bishop to d6 check. So Ragozin completely just hung a rook here, hoping for this fork. Now, the funny thing comes when his opponent believed him, absolutely believed him, and was scared enough to not make the move. It's a completely winning move. You're just up a rook. There is no legal fork. And his opponent just took his word for it. Like, I don't know if he missed something or what, but he decided not to take this this free rook and went rook to d5, moving out the way. And now this is nice and comfortable for black. You can keep the pieces on the board, slowly advance these, and eventually black ended up winning the position shortly after. Where are we? There we go. Rook to d5. Shortly after winning the position, shuffling, and then actually managed to get the fork as well, which is quite cool. He ended up with the fork. But the funny thing is, his opponent completely believed him. He played the move with such confidence that his opponent took his word for it. I think we all sort of are familiar with that feeling, I've had it especially in my Road to Master games where someone's hung a piece, but they've played it with such confidence that I don't even consider for a second that it's up for grabs, So I think that's a really interesting example of how psychology can affect chess, It's not something that's talked about particularly frequently, but psychology is a massive part of the game, and it's something that shouldn't be overlooked. If you play things with enough confidence, there's a chance your opponent might believe you, even if they don't particularly work out. And this is such a crazy and extreme example of that there's just a rook completely hanging on the board. So anyway, that's our first example. On to the next one. So the next example we have here, it's Bobby Fischer versus Boris Spassky. And this is in the World Championship match that I had in 1972. Now, this is actually round one of the World Championship match. And it's crazy to think that a blunder could happen in round one, because nowadays, round one is often guaranteed to be a draw. I don't want to say guaranteed to be a draw, but players don't usually push for anything crazy in round one nowadays. It's often used as just a way to sort of size each other up and see how they're sort of playing and what sort of things they are looking for in the game. But anyway, this is round one of the World Championship match. Bobby Fischer has black and Boris Spassky has white, and here it's black's move. White has just played b4, and if you can try find the blunder, it's quite cool, like a reverse puzzle. What's the worst move you could play? And we'll go ahead and play it. You might have seen this one before. Bobby Fischer takes the pawn on h2. What takes the pawn on h2 is absolutely wild. Now, the computer's not actually saying this is a blunder, but you can see very shortly that it turns into not a nice position. Now, the whole reason you never take these pawns on the h when you've got the other two is because of this whole idea. You play g3. You play g3, and what are you doing? The bishop is trapped. It can't take this without sacrificing itself for two pawns, which I guess could be playable in some situations. And if the bishop goes down to g1, the king can go to e2 and cover it that way. So Spassky goes ahead and plays g3. Why would you not? Otherwise, you're just down a pawn. And then Bobby Fischer actually had this really cool idea of playing h5. We can see bishop g1 here. King e2 is just completely sound for white. They just go to f1. Bishop can come back. King g2, and it's pretty solid. Pretty solid here for white. Anyway, this h5 idea is actually quite cool, and the whole point is that the king can come around to e2, like we said, and try win this bishop. It has to come all the way to g2 in order to do that. And h4 is the whole idea. You're threatening to take, and then bishop takes. But after king f3, you've added another defender onto this g-pawn, so it's going to be the same result either way. And then what Fischer played in the game, which I'm sure he played after he realised this idea doesn't work out. King to e7. You just play on. You eventually trade off the bishop for 2 pawns, and you play on in this lost position. The computer actually says it's potentially drawing, but that's going to prove much, much harder than in reality against just a piece up. But let's have a look at h3. h3, I think, is a really, really cool idea. Now, what happens with h3 is you're actually blocking the king off from getting to g2 in order to win this bishop. The other sort of threat is going bishop to g1 with the idea of h2 and promoting the pawn if the king ever gets away from this f3 square and control of the g2. So if we just sort of play this out a bit, we can make some moves. And you can see here, this is a very quick way to promote a queen. Unfortunately, this doesn't work out if White's actually smart about it. They can come up to g4. And you see here they are just winning this pawn. And there potentially is a way for Black to escape here. You see now they've come up. They no longer have control of this f2 square, like we said. The bishop comes to g1. Now, if White's not careful, this pawn's a runaway pawn, you know. So they just go ahead and take it. I think they have to take it. At which point Black takes f2. And you might think bishop e1. Bishop c3 is a surefire way to escape getting trapped again. But there is this really nice move, bishop to d2. And they're controlling this and the e1 square. The king is still controlling g3 as well. And this bishop is as good as gone. So, yeah, bishop takes h2. I don't know what Fischer was thinking. I'm sure there's plenty of interviews and things online talking about the game. Although he wasn't particularly known for being very good with the press. And we can see how this plays out. We can just shuffle through the motions. In the game, he did the king e7 with the h takes g3. And then trade off the bishop that way. It's a very slow and painful defeat, really, for Black here. Very good technique, obviously, from the world champion Spassky. And you get this sort of structure as well. So Black can just sit here and defend that, potentially even go all the way around and win this pawn. And that's similar to what happens. Black loses control of the e and the g pawn. And here, Black resigns. You know, you can push this, but as soon as the king gets to c7, the bishop can come to d4 and control this promotion square, grab this pawn, and then just promote as well. There is nothing what Black can do. Nothing Black can do, unfortunately. But yeah, the blunder, bishop takes h2 in the first round of the World Championship match. Absolutely wild. And just for a bit of information, Fischer actually ended up winning that match 12.5 to 8.5. So he managed to come back from this devastating loss in round 1. But on to the next example. So the next example we have here is a bit more of a complicated one. This is from a game in New York from 1924. And it's Edward Lasker with the white pieces versus Efim Bogoljubov with the black pieces. Now, you might have heard the name Lasker before, and you're probably thinking of Emanuel Lasker, who was actually the second world champion, who was actually still playing at this match as well. But this is Edward Lasker, still an absolutely amazing player, and you should definitely check out some of his games. Specifically, there is this one where he had a king move mate, which is absolutely wild. So do check that out. But that's not what we're looking at today. We're looking at some more low quality games, I should say. So here, Black played queen to h4. King to h1 is the only move. Now, Black has a few options here. We'll start off with what was played in the match, which was f6. Now, f6 is a mistake because of this really, really nice tactic. If you can see it, I'll give you a second. So the idea is rook takes e5. Absolutely amazingly, brilliantly awesome move, I guess. And after pawn takes, you get queen takes e5 check. Now, the move here is actually rook to b4 after the king moves to g8, rook to b4. Now, a few of you, including me when I first saw this, might be thinking, why can't they take this rook on c7? And I will quickly show you. After rook takes c7, this rook is still hanging from the pawn. So black can throw in this cheeky check on d4 and then just take the rook. And you are down a rook, basically. You're down a rook because you sacrificed the rook for the pawn at the beginning. So that's why you can't take the rook on c7. We'll go back to rook to b4. So this is the main move. And you can see it's getting away from the attack from the pawn and hitting the queen at the same time. So black throws in this move, this check. Only move is king to f2. And now black has a minute to move the rook out of the way onto f7. So the best move for white actually here is to just take this knight, and you've got compensation for the sacked rook. The problem is that's not what white did in the game. What white did in the game was decide to go for a perpetual check with rook to b8. And after the rook takes, the queen takes, king moves up, and you get this perpetual mate here. Not perpetual mate, perpetual check with the queen on b8 and e5. So the best move was actually just to take the knight on g3 here. King takes g3. And black is slightly better here with a computer evaluation of 2.28. So that was what was played in the game. We will go now to what Alekhine wrote. Now, Alekhine was also a world champion, and during this competition, he was analysing and annotating all of the games from the whole competition in New York in 1924. So he was writing down all of his opinions and moves and thoughts about every single one of the games. And apparently I heard he was doing this without a board, and he was just doing this in his head, which is absolutely ridiculous. And I think he can be forgiven for making a few mistakes. So what Alekhine wrote about this game was that rook d5 is actually a really interesting move, and apparently the best move from the computer as well. So the whole idea here is that the queen goes to b6 and hits this rook. Now, what Alekhine wrote was c takes b5 is the best move here, expecting queen takes c7. The problem is Alekhine actually missed a mate in 4 in this position, which is absolutely wild. Let's pause and see if you can find the move. I'll give you a second. So the move is actually just f6 here, and no matter where the king goes, let's say it goes back, because the bishop's covering this diagonal here and the pawn's covering this g7 square, the queen can just go to b8 with a very, very quick checkmate, a few blocking moves, but it will be checkmate in the end. So yeah, f6. The problem is he also not only did he miss the mate, he grabbed the rook as well, and this is completely winning for black. This is completely winning for black. So not only did he miss a mate, he actually lost the game with this. Where are we? Queen takes c7. There we go. Because of this queen d4 idea. Now, it's very tempting to actually throw in this knight to f5 first, because the queen's hitting the rook. But actually the rook has this really cool intermezzo move of rook to e4, hitting the queen again. And it's still slightly winning for black, but not as much. So you throw in this queen to d4 check first. Then when the king moves, now you can go ahead and take this this f5 pawn. The rook can come to e4, hit the queen now. If they decide to take the knight with the bishop here, this is devastating for black. You've got queen to h4 check, and you just pick up the rook here. But after rook to e4, queen to c5, and you force off a trade of queens, and it's not looking nice for white at all. So not only did Lasker miss this rucksack, but also Alekhine, who was the world champion, missed this mate in 4, and then subsequently missed the win after that and messed up the position for white, which is absolutely insane. Granted, he did do this in his head, and there are rumours about him being a pretty big drinker as well. So maybe things can be forgiven, but still an absolutely wild game. On to the next example. So the next example we have here, you might have known this one. It's actually from last year's World Championship match, Dingleren versus Gukesh Domoraju. This is the 14th and final game of the match. After this, it will go to tiebreaks. The score is currently 6.5, 6.5. And all Dingleren needs to do here is draw this position. It's Gukesh with the black pieces and Dingleren with the white. So the question is, how do you draw this position? Basically, saying it's simple is a bit of an understatement, but it is simple. All you need to do is trade off the rooks and keep the bishops on the board. That's all you need to do. You sack the bishop for the extra pawn. If you can trade off a pawn first, that's what you do, and then you sack the bishop for the extra pawn. And a bishop on its own cannot make the king. So that's all Gukesh needs to do. In this situation, Gukesh made an absolutely terrifying blunder that actually lost him the game, the match, and the World Championship title. It was very heartbreaking to see, and I felt very, very bad for Dingleren, and I think the world did as well. You know, he's such an amazing person. It's very sad to see him lose in this way after such an amazing match. So what Dingleren did here was try to continue his plan. Trade off the rooks and keep the bishop on the board. So how do you trade off the rooks here? Rook to f2, and this is actually the moment where everything crumbled, basically. The problem is, Black's actually happy to trade off the rooks here because they have this move bishop to d5, and you can see being with the bishop on the a8 square, it can't actually avoid the trade of the d5 bishop, which is it's brutal, really. So you just have to continue. Bishop takes, king takes, and then resigns here in this situation, leaving Gukesh to win and become the new world champion with a final score of 6.5, 7.5 to Gukesh. So what could Dingleren have done different in this position? Literally any bishop move. Any bishop move that allows him to keep the bishops on the board and then do a trade would have been still drawing. You know, you got to stick to the plan of keeping the bishops on the board. It's just unfortunate that the bishop was stuck on a8, so that the trade was unavoidable. You know, if it was on like a c6, you could have moved to the side, but unfortunately not. And this was a particularly brutal one to see just happen live, you know, as well, like the whole world watching. And it's really cool to celebrate a new world champion, but to see someone's hard work that they've put in just crumble right before their eyes, it's very rough. And I felt the same watching Dingleren versus Nepo, that final game where in the tiebreaks where Nepo ended up losing. It's heartbreaking, really, but it's sports, and that's what sports is. Anyway, yeah, a very, very brutal slip-up. And that's all it was a slip-up, because both of them realised as soon as he played it. And it just shows one lapse, one tiny, minute second where you lose your concentration, it is the end of the game. You know, and that's how brutal chess is, and that's, I think, why so many people love the game as well. You know, that it is all on you, you know, and it's up to you to prove it. But anyway, on to the final example we've got today. So the final example for today's video, this is actually a match between Vladimir Kramnik, who was a world champion, versus Deep Fritz, who is not a person, it's a computer. Now, there is a significant history of world champion versus computer games matches in chess, starting off with Garry Kasparov versus Deep Blue. I think there was a predecessor to Deep Blue as well, who he managed to beat. And Deep Blue in 1996 was actually the first computer to ever beat a world champion in a game of chess. But this is from a match between Vladimir Kramnik and Deep Fritz in 2006. So a bit later, the computer was a bit more advanced. However, some special precautions were made to make the game a bit more fair. I think the computer only was able to process things during the match, so there was no pre-processing. And I think Kramnik was able to prepare with a version of the computer before the match as well. So it was some measures taken in order to make the game a bit more fair. And actually, the match ended in a draw, 4-4, 2 games each. Very, very interesting stuff. I think there is a lot of really cool stuff in computer chess. So yeah, it's really cool to see humans versus computers. Nowadays, I don't think anything of that magnitude could slide. Computers are way, way too strong for any human. I think Magnus Carlsen in his recent Joe Rogan interview said something about him never even being able to beat the computer on his phone. Anyway, I'm sidetracking here. So this is from the game. Vladimir Kramnik has the black pieces against Deep Fritz, who has the white. So here, black's just played knight to a5. And Deep Fritz offers a trade of rooks here, with bishop takes e3, check, and the knight takes f8. And Kramnik decides to go for this. And they end up trading off the rooks here. And Vladimir is hitting this pawn on b2 as well. Here, Kramnik makes a horrific blunder that shocked the world, I think, and it's still often talked about today. He goes queen to e3. Queen to e3. Now, what is this doing? This is offering a queen trade into maybe even a slightly better endgame for black. The only problem is he ends up blundering a mate in 1 on queen h7. With the rook covering the h7 square, the queen can just go to h7. Yeah, there's nothing much to say about this one. This is just a blind spot, and everyone goes through blind spots. I often suffer with blind spots in my games as well, but this is a very, very extreme example of such a thing. Blundering a mate in 1. There's nothing else to say. There is nothing else to say. Other than chess is a horrible, horrible game. Anyway, that's a nice little tidy one to finish off today. I hope you all enjoyed this. I hope it made you feel a bit better about your chess, knowing that even these legends can fall to stupid mistakes. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed. Please like if you liked. Please subscribe if you really liked. And I'll catch you guys all tomorrow. Bye-bye.